Welcome to a new episode of Schmovie. This is episode number 288. In the spirit of sort of new things that we're doing on the podcast, if you don't know, real quick, we started a YouTube series over on our YouTube channel called Marvel Schmarvel. Want to make sure we get that out there. It comes out every weekend where we're recapping the Marvel series on Disney Plus and movies as they come along, I'm sure. But in addition to that, we're going to kind of pick up where we've done before, like with some series here on the podcast. We've kind of went through and watched all of the, movies in a franchise or in a series of films, whether it was Sleepaway Camp, Candyman, whatever it might be. Mad Max. Like we've talked about this, doing this longer term on the podcast. So we're going to kind of get into that now that we're coming out every week. Just kind of mix it up a bit, have an episode here and there that's just, like we're kind of going through and watching them all. So we're going to call them Watch 'em Alls naturally.
Yeah.
And this is going to be the first episode in a series of episodes. We're going to watch all the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Before we get to talking about that, we should probably say who we are. I'm Steve. And who else is here?
I'm Ron.
And I'm John.
Yeah.
Yes.
But based on the sweater that you're wearing, Steve, I feel like someone else is here with us today.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Fred Krueger. There he is. I mean, this is a Christmas shirt, but
Jackie Earl Haley himself.
That's it. Yeah. Good old Jackie.
The iconic.
We'll get to that later, John.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the Nightmare series and specific films in this series a lot on the podcast. We love talking about horror movies in general. But so it's natural that we kind of would come back around and spend some time probably over the next, pepper these episodes through, but over the next month or so, kind of go through and, kind of watch them in pairs in some cases, in trios or whatever, however we group them together. But this first episode, we're going to obviously start with Nightmare on Elm Street, and we're going to go through that and a Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And
it's got a subtitle, Steve.
We'll go from there. Yeah, what is it? Freddy's Revenge?
Freddy's Revenge, yeah.
Yeah.
Freddy's Revenge.
Just threw that off, man. It's just
yeah.
One of these episodes, I'm going to surprise you guys. I have this iconic image. I think I've actually sent it to you too before on my parents' refrigerator.
Oh, I remember.
You remember this? Of a shirtless me on the boardwalk in Ocean City, Maryland, probably around like 8, 7, 9. I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark. They used to have those like photo spots where you could like sit with the cardboard cutouts of your favorite characters. And I'd always do mine with the horror legends. I got the Freddy, the Jason, the Michael. But the Freddy one's just great because for some reason I don't have a shirt on. And it just felt right. And yeah.
I thought you were going to say that you were painted in stripes or something, but you didn't go that far.
That would be cool too. But
you were excited enough to whip your shirt off. You just didn't have like anything thought out after that, right?
Right. And it's just, it's a great photo. So maybe I'll bring that on the pod, maybe on our last episode for this.
In my version of the story, you were trying to show Freddy who's bossy. You just like, I got something for you, Fred.
I got this.
Check
cold?
out these
you need a sweater? Well, check it out.
I thought he might lend me his.
Because I'm about to give you the cold shoulder, Freddie.
Ooh,
so it could be real cold in the shade.
Yeah. Oh, man. So, yeah, I don't know. So it's going to be fun. This is of the series, there's some definite standouts as an overview. Like, obviously, we talked about those on the podcast, like I just mentioned. And I think that the same few always come up, but it'll be really fun to kind of go through and give some attention to the ones that maybe we don't talk about as much. Talk about what works, what doesn't work, what stands out, what's kind of maybe stood the test of time. Some things age well, not so much for others.
Yeah.
And, just the cultural impact of Freddy Krueger. I mean, I feel like, I don't know, in general, of a lot of the horror icons, I feel like, whenever there's like every Halloween, they have like, the brackets where they kind of like break them down.
Mm-hmm.
They have all the icons in these like, Freddy versus Chucky and Chucky, or you know what I mean? Like it breaks down, and it always comes down like usually the same 3 or 4. And I feel like Fred Krueger is always in those semifinals, if not in the final round, if not the winner, depending where you look. But for me personally, he's definitely up there. And I feel like depending on the day of the week, it kind of comes down to usually him and Michael Myers. But I think just in terms of rewatchability, I probably have watched the Nightmare movies over and over more than maybe any other horror series, if I'm guessing. What about you guys? Like, where do you fall on Nightmare in general and Freddy Krueger as a horror icon?
Ronald?
Well, Freddy scared me as a kid, man. So I stayed away like the plague. Whenever it was on, I kind of glanced in the room. I was like, oh no, he's doing something again.
He's back.
He's showing up in another boiler room, and it's fucking scaring the hell out of me. So I stayed away from them for a really long time. I kind of saw some of them as a kid, but I really stayed away. I was more afraid of the idea of Freddy than actually seeing him on screen. I didn't see him on screen very often.
Right.
I'd say I've seen most of them only once or twice in my whole entire life, and some of them I haven't seen at all. So that's gonna be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm similar, Ronald, in that I thought Freddy was a really scary idea when I first heard it. And the reason why I think this series was so big for me was because it was kind of the tipping point for me with my interest in horror and creepy shit, overcoming my fear of it or overcoming my feeling that it could happen. And I remember somebody telling me about this movie, the first one. I think the first two were already out. Someone was telling me about it, and I believe I was already looking at Fangoria on a pretty regular basis. So it's like I was aware of these movies, but there was a part of me, like I had a hard time getting to sleep when I was a kid. I had bad dreams if I saw anything remotely scary, you know, and this was one that really sounded scary to me because it sounded to me like, well, once you've got this, then you can't escape. There's no safety. Like, it wasn't like I thought Freddy was real for a second. I mean, I was never that, you know, out to lunch. But I did think like, well, what am I afraid of if not something that can come and find you in your dreams, and that if just by thinking about it, you've brought it on you. You know, you don't have to like encounter it. You don't have to invite a vampire into your house. You just have to think about it in that way that like Dan Aykroyd thinks of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man at the end of Ghostbusters. Spoilers, where it's like, don't think of anything, and then the first thing, something's going to jump into your mind, you know? So like, don't think about Freddy Krueger, and you're like, well, too bad. I already did it. Yeah. So I think for me, when I was like 13 or 14, no, I guess it would have been 13. The second one was out in 85, and I think it was around that time that I saw them on video. That for me was like when I went from being like interested in horror and kind of afraid of it to sort of going, okay, the best way for me to deal with these fears I have is to just watch these movies and have fun with them. And so yeah, to me, Freddy kind of represented, like I was telling you guys, I had posters on my wall when I was a kid, and it's crazy to think that my parents would allow that, and I wouldn't even necessarily want that now. But I think that was why. It was that to me it represented some kind of, like I had achieved some status within myself of not being afraid to watch these movies that I was so curious about. Because you know, prior to that, I really was like almost to a superstitious degree. Like, I wouldn't watch something I thought might scare me because I would be worried, oh, I'm going to be up for literally for weeks, you know, if I see this.
I was shaken to my core by that guy. So I didn't watch a lot of them. So
something that it's interesting that you know both have mentioned, and you know Ronald kind of said right at the beginning of his thoughts. It's kind of like interesting as we go through these movies, because I mean I watch these pretty regularly, but like as we go through this for this series, it is interesting to note, like, I guess how much Freddy, the character of Freddy, changes as we get through you know, the sequels. And there is a definite point in the franchise where he kind of becomes the pop culture, you know, icon that most people think of when they think of Freddy Krueger. But I mean, before that point, and I mean, a lot of what these first two films, we'll talk about in a moment, like these first two, especially the first one, the original Nightmare on Elm Street, written and directed by Wes Craven, it's a really different character. Like the creepiness, the scariness of the idea of what he's able to do and how he's able to do it, really clicks in the first one. And it really is. It is really quite terrifying, just the idea of it. And as we kind of get through these movies, even to the second one in Freddy's Revenge, you kind of feel the awareness of a studio or you know, like a franchise to create more of a character that can like go beyond the screen and kind of get into things like merch and music videos and like, you know, things like that. And I mean, and I think that's like an inverse relationship. Like as it gets more into that, it becomes like less of a scary character so much as just like an interesting horror icon. You know what I mean? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I would mirror those thoughts. I think the first two, he's scarier than he is in the ones after that. And that's not to say those are the two best movies, but just the figure that he represents is of a creepy figure. Even when he's kind of brought into the real world and we're able to sort of see, okay, Robert Englund isn't a big imposing guy, but when he's just lurking around Nancy's house, he has this creep factor of like a home invader type or something we might see in a true crime show or something. So like the fact that his it's never been about him being the most imposing person, the way that Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees are both sort of big, even though in the first Halloween, Michael Myers is not that big, but I think Freddy's even more kind of unlikely of as far as an intimidating figure when you look at Robert Englund. So I don't know. There's something about, in those first two movies, like not only had they not yet decided he was a one-line artist like Arnold Schwarzenegger, where everything's going to be a pun, but I think also you were learning who the character was, and so they had to kind of roll in the story and roll in the mythology, and they it's not like they knew he was this Joker and they just hadn't revealed it yet. It was like they were slowly figuring out like how to make this guy scary. And I think those first two movies, again, it's more about this figure lurking around and him being this kind of scary looking person. Whereas later it's more about like waiting for him to show up and do some crazy thing. And also the dream sequences, again, become a big theme in this series. But the first two movies don't really have that much in the way of crazy, like dream imagery based on, this person likes playing jacks. So their dream is going to be something where they are turned into a jack and they get thrown. I don't know. There's I feel like that was something they didn't hit on right away. So the first movie in particular, it's using kind of nightmare imagery more like the thing where you're running and your feet get stuck. Less like, I'm afraid of roaches, so I'm going to dream about roaches or whatever.
I mean, aside from a couple of things, like I wouldn't have thought he was magical at all. Like I just thought it would be like a person that was badly burned that is clearly trying to murder every teenager that he comes in contact with. And I kind of like that. Like I think you're right. There's something about that character building that I really enjoyed that I guess I couldn't have enjoyed as a kid because I was absolutely petrified. Now that I'm like older, I'm like, this is scary as shit. But it's also like the molestery part of him being like a kid killer and like a pedophile, possibly in the later ones. Is that like established in the? Yeah,
it's interesting. I would say that some part of me thought it was always implied, but they just didn't want to say it.
Right.
Later, they were more explicit about it. But you're right. These first two movies, there's no pedophilia. It's murdering kids.
No, it's just murdering kids, which makes it so much darker. And it's also the.
Well, I mean, he killed the kids. The pedophile version kills them too. So I don't know if it's. I don't know if it's.
It just adds on to it.
Right. I think it's darker when he's also a pedophile.
Yeah.
But as far as like it being dark enough with this notion that he's a guy who they said 20 kids,
Yeah.
And
he took them all to that abandoned factory too.
So maybe we should talk about the tone of the first one that we.
Let's just kind of get into.
Let's get into the first one. You already said it was written and directed by Wes Craven. Many people view him as an influential person in the genre or a genius. I do think, for reasons I don't really want to go into because they're boring, I did watch the second one first for this show. So it was very interesting just how much more of like a movie that was trying to be a genuinely good movie. The first one felt to me after watching the second one first. And that's not to say the second one, again, I haven't revealed that I don't think it's bad or anything. It's just, it doesn't feel like it's swinging for like the fences the way that I think Wes Craven typically does or did. Like his movies, he had an idea and a vision and could speak very eloquently about his inspirations and stuff. So I think that first movie, you feel right away, it has a real concept behind it,
Yeah. One thing I did notice about the first one is like this movie has the bones of a lot of other movies, like Candyman feel, and like there are other films that I've seen, after it. Maybe that's kind of when I think about whatever new characters they're trying to create, possibly like let's say after 1987, 1988, it feels like everybody's kind of. Anybody that isn't quiet is kind of a Freddy clone or something like that with the like he has I think once they realized
the showmanship to it.
Yeah, the showmanship. Once they realized that he had an incredible laugh, and incredible at delivering lines like that, everybody kind of ran with that sort of thing. But this world building that they do, these old teenagers that clearly don't seem like they're well, this girl's 15.
Heather Langenkamp, who plays Nancy, she actually does look sort of teen-aged, but
Sometimes.
the woman who plays Tina does not look as young. So anyway, but yeah, that's a thing that carries over. This this is not the first movie to do that, but it does give us our first look, right? At or is this our second look? Was he in Platoon first, Steve? Do you know the Johnny Depp story well enough to know which came first?
No, I think this was his film debut.
Yeah, so
fresh face. This was his first.
Johnny Depp, and I think that this was the one where he was like, I've now played a guy who wears like button-down shirts and khakis, so I don't ever have to do that again.
Never again. It's like never will I ever wear a pair of business casual pants ever in my life.
Well, I have a new hot take based on this viewing, which is hard to find when you've seen a movie a million times. But Glenn is kind of glib and useless, and Rod has a lot more soul. That was my hot take after seeing that this time.
I kind of agree with you, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to agree with you.
There's a lot more to Rod.
Yeah, well, he had. I mean, what happens to Rod is one of those horrible things in a movie where you just know. Someone was talking recently about that scene in The Shining where Danny comes out with the ripped sweater, and we believe at that point it might be a ghost that did it to him, but we totally understand that this is going to tear this family apart because the suspicion of what really happened to him is going to. And so that notion of like, there's no way you can escape suspicion of this thing that you didn't do. And everything leading up to it was so incriminating too. Yeah, Rod really was doomed from the start. But I mean, like Tina's death is probably one of the most iconic ones in the series. But to what I was saying before, it's not based around she had a fear of the ceiling. It's just based around like nightmare logic and nightmare imagery, and like what would be a scary thing to see happen in the room if it was happening to someone you couldn't help, but also like what it must be like to go through what she was going through. Yeah, it's a really gruesome. And it really kind of buys into that notion that you were talking about, Ronald, of like, this guy is just, I mean, he's just a killer. Like, I don't know. There's something really, really scary about him after the viciousness in that first movie makes him seem like a much scarier character.
That's also like one of the things in this one, especially because we don't see, we don't see Freddy kind of like customizing the dream sequence. We don't see him customizing the way that these characters die. And that again is what kind of makes it it makes it scarier because, there's a big problem in differentiating if you're watching a dream or if you're watching it in real life, much like Tina, Rod is watching what's happening to her, but in a dream, she is being killed and it looks much like this or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, to the characters when they're in those sequences in most cases, they're not in an environment that they haven't seen before or that doesn't feel like it could be real. And that's what's really scary about, the kills and the setup in this original film. Because again, you don't feel like it's surreal. You feel like, when they're walking down the hallways of the school when something's off, like, oh, that's because she fell asleep in class. And like but she's in school. Like this looks real, We as a viewer see a bit of a haze or a fog on the shot to kind of help maybe differentiate it for us a little bit, or to make something just a little askew. But I mean, to the character, they become a little more aware of it as they go through these sequences, especially Nancy. But I mean, it's kind of wild to watch this one again and know more and more about, obviously, again, having seen a lot of them multiple times, like how much it relied on the fact that it was a part of what was so scary was not being able to tell if you were dreaming or not or awake. And that's really fucking scary. And again, that's why a lot of these work so well. And like you said, John, like the sequence with Tina, especially because you see a character watching it happen, that just kind of like takes it to a whole nother level. And that's why that's one of the most iconic in the whole series for sure.
Yeah. How do you feel about the rules that are established about how Freddy attacks people and all that stuff? Kind of that's important in these sorts of movies. The kind of establishing the rules of the dreams and being what'd you think about
Like what?
how
Like are
they-
you like anything specifically, or what do you mean? Like
no. I guess for every movie that we watch that has a little magic in it, I always wonder how if they do a good job of explaining the logic within the film.
I think the first movie
Yeah.
actually does a really good job of
I think so.
of staying simple and kind of
Yeah,
being
totally.
elemental
Super
about
simple.
it.
Yeah.
I think the second movie, it's almost like going back and seeing the second, which we'll get to. The second one does some interesting things, adding on new Freddy powers, like it's a new Star Wars movie where they're adding on Jedi powers left and right. But as far as the first movie, I think the general idea is laid out pretty cleanly, and I think the whole fact of Nancy realizing she can bring, that was one of the big things that stuck with me, was that notion of something physical from the dream staying with you in the waking world. Because I think when you're a kid, you're sort of fascinated with that idea anyway. Like there's things you dream about that you like. I remember one time I dreamt of getting a puppy, and I kind of started to think it was a dream. And so I thought if I held on, I remembered thinking if I hold on to this puppy, he'll be there when I wake up. And I feel like it's one of those dumb things where it's like, I never really proved it to myself one way or the other, because something would always happen that would distract me from it, and I couldn't say. But I had this feeling that, well, if I have it, then I should, or if an album I wanted to hear by a band I liked or something. If I have it in my dream, if I can like hear it in my dream, that's kind of the same thing as hearing. I do
Definitely.
think that I think that, again, that's obviously fantasy, but it is an interesting notion that the movie plays with and visualizes really nicely. Like when she brings the hat out, it's the same part where she has the shock of gray hair, which to me is another iconic thing about this movie. It's just her look after she gets that that's kind of like her badge of honor. And then of course she goes all home alone on Freddy too, which again I think is a part that I sort of forget, that climax is very hijinks focused, but he's still scary. Him in that suburban environment, just looking, like you said, Steve, just being a being in the world is a creepy presence, and you got to give him credit for inventing that.
Yeah. One thing I did really enjoy was kind of the character actors that were kind of in it. John Saxon and Ronnie Blakely. It was really interesting to see kind of the adults were adults in a cool way that I remember when I was a kid. Like, it seems like
with a secret
lot of
and like a group murder that they were all part of. That's the way you remember adults.
Yeah,
right?
that's the way you remember it. Them handling this group murder and the mom kind of dealing with her pain through alcoholism.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool that they felt like adults. Like, although these kids looked really old, it felt like their presence was like, I don't see adults like this anymore. Like John Saxon, when was the last time you saw a man that was like 55 or younger that looked like this dude? Like, nobody has that look anymore. He has like this very distinct look that existed for actors back then. And I felt him every time he was in a scene. I'm like, I feel this man's pain. He didn't react to any of the carnage, by the way. Anything that came up, he would just be like, oh, okay. That's odd that the man was butchered.
I love it when he says to the guy, watch my daughter, watch the house, see if anything happens with my daughter. And then later Nancy is like in the house locked in with the bars, and the house seems to be on fire, and she breaks the glass and she screams, Dad, help me, help me. And the guy says, I think I better tell the lieutenant. And I was like, is that supposed to be a joke? Because it's almost perfectly delivered enough that it could be a deliberate joke, that's what's happening. But I like John Saxon a lot in this role. I do also think her mother, is that Ronnie Blakely? Yeah. She's just got this credibility. You feel the history. You feel like the effort made to give those characters some kind of weight. She had weight except for the last moment of the film when she becomes inflatable and gets pulled through a window. I mean, she fucking becomes a balloon person. Something I had forgotten is how much they call him Fred in this movie.
I can't stand it. I can't stand it. They call him
I kind of
Fred.
love it, but I had just forgotten it. I had just forgotten that that's what they called him, and like
I think Freddy is like really kind of like that demarcation point of like that's more of the character,
right?
That you get into.
Oh, buddy, you talking about the kid killer Fred? That's what you're talking about. You're not talking about the
Fred is kind of a funny name for a kid killer. Either way, also that look. We've never really discerned like what is that supposed to be? The sweater with the fedora and like work pants.
Yeah.
work shoes. I've never, it is a funny look. It's iconic, but there's a part in the movie where she says he has a weird hat. And I thought, like, it's not really that weird of a hat. And I thought of weirder hats, like those hats that are like an umbrella that sits on your head. Those are weirder. But it's weird that he has a hat. It's I'll give her that. It's not a weird hat, but
he puts it back onto his head very neatly, just like, time to terrorize you guys. I love it. So yeah, I really enjoyed this movie in general. Like, from the rules to the carnage, it felt like there was some real stakes. And I think that was one of the cooler parts about this movie. Like, it really felt like there were real stakes. People were being victimized pretty frequently. It wasn't like the deaths were spread out in a very almost perfect way. I feel like Wes Craven's pacing
it's
of
12
this film,
minutes in when we get our first death. This movie is at 90 minutes, and it's an insult to say it feels longer, but I think you guys will know what I mean when I say it. You think of it as longer because it moves so fast. Like
it does.
Yeah.
What was the end of that thought, Ronald? I wanted to hear what you were saying.
Oh, what was that? What did I start with? Hold on. What was the beginning of it? Because I can rev the engine back up. I just gotta remember.
Oh man.
Oh, it was about the stakes. So the stakes.
Yeah, the stakes.
So the stakes.
Oh yeah, the pacing. Yeah. You said Wes Craven.
Okay. Yes. Okay. This is what I was going to say. I feel like Wes Craven's pacing of the action, and having kids be unrealistically brave, and then also scary, and he did such a good job of establishing the tone. Like, sure, I mean, at some point we kind of accept that these people within this world are making crazy decisions, right?
Yeah.
And I still feel comfortable watching it because the world has its own sort of logic that doesn't feel stupid. It feels more like, oh man, these kids are being haunted by a man when they in their dreams, and that they're scared, and this kid got framed for murder. That's another thing about Freddy. Freddy also likes to frame kids for murder. That's a thing that I didn't take the first time I saw this
didn't kill
film.
them.
It is
who believes them? Who was going to believe a teenager's like somebody's killing people in their dreams?
Right.
Yes,
you know what I mean? So like that's already a strike against them.
Yeah,
but
he's just wreaking havoc. In this neighborhood.
It's a good point. Like I think that I think one of the big takeaways in rewatching it this time was like the reminder, really, that what it like to the characters in this movie, like obviously his glove, his razor blade, knives for fingers, like how he's characterized through the rest of the series, and I have his glove still, like it's like an iconic thing,
the
but
real
I think
one.
Yeah, I got it from him. Awesome. Yeah.
Fred
Super
Krueger?
cool. Super, yeah. But what I was saying, like that basically in this one, you really are reminded that these characters, Nancy, Glenn, Tina, Rod, what's scarier, like that becomes like a marker for who he is, and like that's an iconic thing, and that's a characteristic of Freddy or of Fred. But I think what's really impressive about this one and stands out is that what's more scary about him is his reach. You know what I mean? Like the iconic scene of like her sleeping in the bed and like him kind of like stretching through the wall, you know, like that's like an iconic,
Or his arms actually stretch at one part. Talk about his reach.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
When he first sees them, they're like very long, and I didn't really understand.
It's like early, it's old effects.
In the alley,
yeah.
Still
scary.
Still
scary,
though,
but
like,
goofy.
yes.
No, you're right. You're right.
It's like
there's
it's like
a breadth
the
of
idea,
skill. He's got like a wide skill set as a character in this vein.
Yeah, and just the fact that like that's how he gets you is in your dreams. And like all the sequences, like that sleeping sequence with like the wall is like I like love that shot, like just the lighting and like the practical, like how they use the sheet to get that. It just looks amazing. And in the when Nancy takes the bath and like the phone, like all these little things that the claws become a part of it, or the knives for fingers become a part of it. But it really is a reminder of like what's really scary about him is not like what he looks like or his like weapon, but it's just like the method that he has at his disposal to reach you and to kill you. And like I love how in sequences when he's not even killing someone, you're just never able to really forget in those 90 minutes, like, oh shit, like look at that image on the wall. Like that's a way he's coming to get you. Like it's really effective. And this one, more than really most of the other films in the series, that is a constant reminder that like, it's just that ability to reach these characters anytime they doze off. And before it really becomes a huge plot device to like take no-dos or like things like we got to stay awake. It's not as, it is important in this one in a way towards the third act, but it's not as like prevalent like it becomes in other movies, like as they've learned more and more and more about Freddy Krueger.
It's part of the formula almost, that this one is like so many of the early slasher films or the first slasher film in a series. It is more of a mystery. It's more of a character-based thing. It's a whodunit. It's about laying out the rules as, so this movie is, I mean, I think we all are agreeing that it was a very effective version of all that, like if you're talking about kicking off of, obviously it was effective because it did it. But I'm just saying, if you see it now, you can see both everything that's brilliant and original about this concept, and you can see the hint of what it would become and the kind of self-caricature that it would kind of devolve or evolve into, depending on how you look at it. I had sort of forgotten a couple of like Nancy's like almost like campy lines that she has in this. There's a part where she runs into the hall pass or the hall monitor Freddy in the hall and says, "Screw your pass," but then later she says, "Screw milk." No, she says screw sleep. So she screw your pass, screw sleep, but it's with milk. She says warm milk. Gross. When her mom offers her warm milk through the door. So it's like I don't know. I had sort of forgotten that she had 2 or 3 moments where she says a line in that sort of like, ugh, kind of petulant way. But I don't know. To me, it's got shockingly small amounts of that campy stuff that a lot of times makes movies from this era, horror movies, slasher films, makes them seem kind of like you could only watch them as a joke now. This movie still holds some power, despite being, as you said, having teenagers who are 30 and that kind of stuff. It's like it hits all the cliches without being one of those disposable movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we all liked it. That's a pretty cool. That's a pretty cool measure for a movie that came out in '84.
It's probably an understatement. This is a movie I definitely love. Are we gonna like do something like where we like rank them in the series?
I think at the end, it makes sense
absolutely.
to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent.
I'm super down.
That'll be fun. Yeah. No, in general, like Nightmare on Elm Street is maybe 1 or 2. It's in like there's like 2 or 3 that I like rewatch pretty regularly, and it's definitely one of the 3. And one of my favorites in the series for sure. And I mean, mentioning Wes Craven real quick before we get on to Freddy's Revenge, like, he obviously has this legacy of like an iconic horror filmmaker, and he's, beloved by basically anybody that's ever worked with him. You hear like this, that the way they talk about Wes Craven is just like, highly positive, and you just really treasure, like, appreciate like what he brought to the genre. And you think over the decades, that he was able to kind of continue to contribute to the genre, create franchises, kind of have a real voice in the horror community, between like, Last House and Nightmare on Elm Street, obviously Scream we've talked about, it's a favorite, but it's just like really, it can't be, I don't know what just like you can't not talk about A Nightmare on Elm Street, just like you can't, you have to mention Freddy. Like, I feel like you just have to make sure you mention Wes Craven and, the importance of like, what that first movie did for horror, did for his career, did for Robert Englund, and, most of the people, and Johnny Depp even, but yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, is a classic in my eyes. So yeah.
It's the reason Heather Langenkamp is a household name.
Absolutely.
Is it Langenkamp or Langen? Is it a hard G?
I thought it was Langenkamp.
Langenkamp. Okay. So
yeah, there's a really great documentary. It's a really comprehensive doc that came out on one of the box sets, The Never Sleep Again. Amazing. If you like any of these movies, you like Wes Craven, anything that we're talking about with this series of Watch 'Em Alls, like, that is a must-watch doc. It's called Never Sleep Again. Highly recommend checking that out too.
It's one of those. It's like super
So
long. It's like
6
6 or 7 hours. There was one for the Friday the 13th films as well.
Yeah, Camp Crystal Lake or
see,
Crystal Lake Memories. Yeah,
I didn't get any sleep last night except for a very, very short nap. And I wanted to let you guys know that I also had to pee during Titanic when I saw it the first time. And I want you to know that watching Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and 2 and not having gotten any sleep the night before is the same sensation as needing to pee. Watching Titanic and the slow drip starts. And but yeah, I was worried, honestly. I was like, am I going to be so tired? Because when you're tired like that, it doesn't even matter if your mind is sharp. Your muscles start giving out on you. And I was like, what's it going to be on the show? How am I going to reveal that I don't have any fuel in the tank? And I think it's my inability to say Langenkamp without really stopping and like taking a breath. Heather,
I got you.
Langenkamp. Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. First question I got to ask you, Ronald, what the fuck is he getting revenge for?
I don't know. One thing you have
Justice?
if you're embarking on this journey for the first time in your life and you're listening to it as this is like a companion piece, please understand that every Freddy is so different from the other that you will be shocked to the point where like it is uncomfortable, even if it takes place in the same like couple years of each other. And this takes place a couple years after the first events. This movie tonally could not be any different than the first. Tell me what he's getting revenge on, because I'm gonna bounce that question back to you. What is he?
I think it's just a title that they were like. I also recently watched Alien versus Predator Requiem, and I was like, okay, I kind of know what Requiem means. I have no idea what that title has to do with this movie at all. I think Freddy's Revenge just sounds kind of cool. It's like saying the return of or the son of, it's just like Freddy's back, is basically what they're saying. But they're leaning into the Freddy right there, even though in this movie they're more likely to call him Fred than Freddy. I guess the calling him Freddy has been there in the song from the start. The 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. So it's not like they've never called him Freddy from the beginning. But I do think it's funny that in this movie, that's still generally the way people refer to him is as Fred. But then he'll call himself Freddy. He'll be like, "Hey," and he's not quite one-liner man yet in this, but he does have a few lines that are hinting at that kind of like, like he's a smartass. Like he, Daddy can't help you now. He says that kind of thing, where it's like it's sort of situational. It's not like necessarily as much of a pun, but it is like he's stopping to be cool. But the look of Freddy in this film it's weird. I find it really gross. I find him really unsettling to look at in this movie. He doesn't look very real necessarily, but he's wet, and it's like
like gooier.
He just seems sleazier. This movie in general has a sleaze quality to it. Like it amps up whatever was kind of sort of perverse about Freddy. And I don't know. What do you guys think of the look and the feel of Freddy in this movie?
John, you're underselling his look, man. In fact, I think he looks different every scene. Aaron and I were trying to determine if he looked the same in 2 scenes. And I don't think he did. Like, I think it's because it's like different scenes, different takes. He looks so different from scene to scene. I just know that he looks gross and he has a couple like scars within a general space. But if you look at the shots, he looks so different from scene to scene that I don't really understand what's happening in this movie at all in terms of his aesthetic. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think just aesthetically, I think this is like probably one of the oddest ways that Freddy looks through the whole series. And and inconsistent. Yeah, you're right. Like in different scenes, it looks a little different. And I mean, honestly, like, this one stands out as probably this is like an outlier. This is like one that is kind of like super unique in a lot of ways beyond just the way Freddy looks. Like Jesse, our protagonist, like, I think this is the only one in the series where like the protagonist is a male. And that's kind of, interesting. And this one has its own like, popularity, legend. I don't know. What do you want to call it about, just like, I guess how like homoerotic the movie is. Like Mark Patton has a doc out, even in the Never Sleep Again doc that I just mentioned. There's a lot of conversation about, the filmmaker and kind of what they were trying to do with the series. But I don't know. There's a lot about this movie that I don't really like, and I think that one of the things that really, after just talking about it so much with the original Nightmare, is just like kind of how they decide I guess as a studio, like we got to get this franchise. Like, what do we do that's different? That's not just the same movie. And I get that, like, kind of up the ante a little bit. But the idea that Freddy is able to, leverage this protagonist to kind of do killings, that Jesse is actually doing some of the things in this movie via Freddy or through Freddy. And that Freddy actually is able to like attack a lot of these kids in this movie in the wake in real life, in the waking world. Like, it's kind of like those elements of this one are a lot of what kind of, it's kind of what makes it kind of weird to me. Like, I don't know. It's very, I remember like watching this years ago and like, oh, it's cool. I like it. But as I've rewatched the series over and over again, it definitely stands out in those elements I just mentioned, like stand out in a negative way to me, because it really does lose a lot of kind of the creepiness and like the mystique or the super natural elements of Freddy from the first one and from ones that follow this sequel.
Yeah. I mean, he looks gross, and they're still making him an intimidating figure. I feel like there's still a few shots in this of just him standing in the dark where you can't see him that well, and his face just looks. I mean, you see the sliminess of him. I do think he's scary, quote unquote, in this movie. But I know what you mean about the story. It feels, it's strange. Like, it maybe didn't seem as strange when this came out, that they were doing some different things with it. But to see that they've made as many as they have now, and that this is the only one that has those differences, the male protagonist, but also the sort of in between, like as though they're rewriting the rule book, as though this movie has more to do with that moment of bringing him into the real world is really what they're saying. Like, oh, last time we learned he can be brought into the real world. Now we see that he wants to be brought into the real world.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's like, it feels like a very sequel-y thing to do. But that whole part with him like taking on a whole pool party full of kids, it just doesn't feel that much like Freddy Krueger. Like, you sort of forget that he ever jumped out of the ground like that and like chased people around. Let alone that there's some kind of clumsy choreography in that scene. There's one guy who runs towards Freddy. He's screaming and he runs onto Freddy's hand.
Into him. Into him.
But I think that like one of my favorite kind of creepy scenes in the first one, there is a scene in the second one that reminds me of it. And the scene in the first one is when we're finding out what's going to happen to Rod. And this to me feels like it's that whole the Wes Craven idea of taking dreams and saying, what's something that you might think would be cool to do in your dream would be like meet up with people, have friends, or go be part of some kind of dream world that you're all in. And that part where they're watching Freddy like milling up through the town and like basically that he's going to kill Rod, and we're seeing him do that. There's a scene in this one where he wakes up and he doesn't know he's dreaming, and he looks in the cellar and sees Freddy throwing, I guess it's like a body part or something, into the furnace. But that is that serial killer feeling of Freddy again, of like, here's the suburbs and here's looking in a window and seeing something. I mean, that's almost like something out of Blue Velvet or something, where it's like you're in this picket fence world and you're looking in the window and seeing this gruesome thing, and it's almost like something out of a fairy tale, the way he's lit by the furnace. I thought that was kind of cool. But what's weird is this movie, they emphasize the furnace so much. Like, they make that heat like a huge part of the movie, and I don't remember that ever being quite the same thing again, where like the fact that Freddy died in a fire was such a big part of like, he brings on the heat. He comes around and things start, birds burst into flames when he's around. But yeah, to me, they did very little that really added to the lore in a way that made sense, and they did kind of take away from the things that made him scary in the first movie. Like, her bringing him into the real world as a defensive mechanism is different from him just being like
leveraging that,
a guy running around, and like that's what he wants most. So I think they had some moments, but overall I think you're right, that movie feels more weird and kind of unsettling, and in some ways kind of, like I said, kind of sleazy or something, more so than super scary.
What's your take on like all the stuff like with Mark Patton and the, like I mentioned earlier, like the filmmaker, like just the, like, I don't even know if it's like a backlash or like it never really stood out to me until I saw the like huge section of it in the doc about like how this film has kind of like this. I don't even know what the right word is, but like, like not a backlash, but like it's kind of known as being like this like low key, and it's got like a following, because
I think
of
the
that.
reason why you're tempted to say backlash, though, is because there is like a built-in thing. There's like a backlash to the movie being the way it was, and then there's
Right.
people who embrace the movie being the way it was, who say that it was kind of coded as
Right.
gay.
That's what-
the people that made it say they weren't really trying to do that. But if you were to tell me they've said they were, I would believe it, because this movie does feel like it wants to go there in so
Right,
many
it
ways,
does.
like right down to even having a relationship with a girl that feels very much like someone who's almost like being bullied by society
to do so.
into putting on this role, into acting like this guy. And so it almost makes you think the movie had more on its mind than it knew, because the actor was turning in this type of performance. And I do think there are moments where there's a comic aspect to his performance, like the high-pitched scream. It's not about it being feminine or about it being, gay. It's about it being just like he's sort of an unlikely hero to have in a movie like this,
Right?
Compared to almost all others that we've seen.
So,
It's unique.
I have a serious issue with sort of the two issues that are kind of happening at once. One is it has some subtext, right? That's one thing, right? But I think that what kind of is getting merged with this is that because it has that subtext, that it was received the way that it was.
Yeah.
That's what's kind of happening. But I'm here to tell you that the movie is just bad. He put in a terrible performance. And I would have loved if he would have just been a gay character who is dealing with Freddy in a way that fit into the tone of the first movie. Look, I have to.
You didn't love that scene where he puts all his stuff away in his room by dancing,
and bumping his butt on the drawer. So here's the thing: I
kind of love that scene. I can't lie to you.
It's
I kind of love it.
Scream Queen, my Nightmare.
What you doing? Just cleaning my room.
Yeah, it's. So I saw that documentary before I saw the second one. I actually did not see the second one and skipped the Dream Warrior just because somebody was like, "Don't see it." It's right. So I saw this documentary, man. I felt this like immense amount of like sympathy for this guy, man. Like he had endured this really harsh sort of blackballing from this film.
I guess that's what I'm getting.
Yeah. Well, like he got blamed for whatever people perceive
Yes.
as the weaknesses of the movie. Yeah.
Right, then I watched it and I realized, yes, he is the weakness. It's not because he's gay though. It's because he sucks and he's putting in. Look, the thing is, tonally, if you go back and look at the first one, everybody's kind of being campy, right?
A little bit.
But there's like a camp to it that is so some of it feels like the spillage from 70s style acting kind of leaking into about 1984, 1985. That's just the breaks. That's Jason Saxon. That's John Saxon. That's Ronnie Blakely. That's just that style of acting that existed in the 70s that is kind of leaked into the 80s, right? Yeah. But you have him kind of putting on a performance that is so out of pocket weird.
Yeah.
And not because it has nothing to do with
it's like I said, there's a high pitched, like he does like a comical scream, and or even when he's like upset about something, it's like there's such a, it's like overacting in the extreme,
Yeah, and what that does though is because the parents are actually better in this film, in these films to me, in the second film. All of the parents all around, I think they kind of realized that they needed parents that felt a little more grounded, right? So they got the people that they cast feel a lot more grounded, and then you have him who's dialing it up to 2000 while everybody's kind of playing it normal. And so what it feels like is like everybody's like, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "Oh no, I'm not okay. Freddy gave it that." It's just like, yo, what is happening right now?
Did either of you happen to notice the scene when he gets out of the car when they get to the school after the coach has died? He gets out of the car with a special kind of like it's just fun. I actually filmed it because I was like, it's such a hilarious little subtle thing, because it's exactly what you're talking about, Ronald. Everything's got this little extra like dramatic flourish, as though he's playing to people in the back row, half a mile away, that need to see what he's doing. Yeah.
And so that's my beef with it. My beef is that because this documentary came out and it has this like,
you had sympathy.
Yeah, man. Look, there are situations where people are legitimately fighting for their voice to be heard, being portrayed as their actual sexuality in a film. Like, you want to be portrayed accurately, not as the stereotype or something like that. Natural. This had nothing to do with it. This man was dialed on 2000. That had nothing to do with his sexuality. This man would have been a straight man putting on this performance. And it feels strange. It turns it into what feels like a parody film. Like, it feels like Freddy felt like, the first one felt like, oh man, this is like, I can't wait for the second one. This came out a year later.
Right.
And this was the tone of it. I'm done with this franchise. If I'm 20 going into the theater to watch it, I'm like, this is the same movie?
Well, that's good, Ronald, because they never made any more. We just covered it.
Yeah. Something that we didn't say was like, the idea of like it coming out a year later was like, it's kind of like a known thing in Hollywood, in the industry, that like, basically New Line Cinema is like, that studio survived and is around today, basically legendary, because of Freddy. Like, they call it the house that Freddy built.
Yeah.
So like the success of Nightmare, getting Nightmare 2 out, which was also still a success a year later, is really motivation for a studio trying to stay alive and ultimately thriving because of this horror franchise and this character. I wanted to circle back to one thing John had mentioned earlier, like, we're kind of yet to the point where Freddy really does have like the zingers, but he does have one of my favorite Freddy lines in this movie, which is, you've got the body, I've got the brains. I've always loved that line. I used to have a shirt when I was like a kid that said that, like with like an image of Freddy from this movie.
Oh wow.
But yeah, it's just I don't know.
Yeah, that was.
I don't know that I love like the idea of what his angle is in this movie, like to kind of get into like him actively getting into the real world, more of an offensive maneuver, like John was saying.
You like that line better than "You are all my children now," which is the strange thing.
God.
What does that even mean?
Is that when he was at the pool?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. One other thing that no one's mentioned yet, and I guess someone has to, or we would really be not doing our jobs. But Grady has a leather comforter.
That was a thing, right?
I never had it's like it's like puffy. I guess I was never like a baller like Grady.
I feel like these first two films, like, Glenn had a pretty baller ass waterbed.
Yeah.
And I think, he's got like a leather comforter. There's like something about progressive betting going on in the beginning of this franchise.
Yeah.
Or at least contemporary betting for the time that these movies came out.
Like if that was like 84, Glenn had like the hand-me-down waterbed from his like swinger uncle that had gotten married or something.
I need you guys to walk me through something. Jesse Walsh is very frustrated with his life and the fear of Freddy killing him. So he goes to a bar that winds up being a gay bar.
Talking about Don's place?
And he sees his coach who has like a S&M sort of outfit on. And then he takes him to the gym and tells him to shower after he gets him to do laps.
Yeah, he makes him do laps first, and then he showers.
But he's still in the leather. He's still leather clad with this like, kind of granny looking outfit. It looks like this was made at home. He did not buy this in a store. This was clearly custom made clothes.
No, that was that actor's own clothes. He just wore them that day.
God, man, there were so many scenes that were bad like that. I didn't really understand. So you don't think that this? What do you think this does for the mythology of Freddy as we progress through the second one? I guess that's a pretty serious question.
It's almost like it's ignored after this, like what gets added to this and what gets emphasized. And I'm still kind of confused. I always thought he was killing the kids in the boiler room at the school, but we find out, and they actually mention it in the first movie. She says that he was taking kids to an old abandoned boiler room, so it wasn't at the school. And then in this movie, we find out it was that big factory. So I guess I think we will be able to track it as we go along, but I don't feel like this movie adds that much that they come back to at all. Like, one of the strangest things about it is like Nancy's diary being a factor. Yeah. That whole connecting to the past that way was never that important in the movies that came. I mean, they would have characters come back and people that knew the story and everything, but that, living in the house and having the diary be the thing that kind of unlocks the presence of Freddy was not something they ever came back to. So, yeah, I feel like this movie is, because of what Steve said, it being an outlier. That's a good question, Ronald, but it really just points up how much they did not want to repeat this movie in almost any way.
Yeah.
And again, I kind of favor it. I don't favor it, but I give it extra points for being an outlier and for being so bizarre and for having such a different feel to it. But there's a good reason why this is a movie I don't know that I've seen since I first watched it. Maybe I've seen it twice compared to, as Steve said, some of the others that I've seen, multiple times. Can't even tell you how many times I've seen part 1 or 3. So yeah, just a strange thing. I looked at the gross. The first one cost $1.1 million and made $57 million, and the second one cost $3 million and made $30 million. So far from a flop, just not what the first one was.
Yeah. Interesting.
Grady's a good friend too, by the way. I think I should throw that out there.
Yeah.
In the end, Grady's like, dude, yes, you can crash at my house. And then when his little buddy's falling asleep, he says like, "Sweet dreams, buddy," or something like that. I think that's a deliberate thing and actually a smart thing the movie does. Like that's one of the smartest things they do is they set up this character who seems like he's going to be a total schmuck asshole, and then in the end, he's a good guy. Like that actually shows some level of sophistication, on the character level.
I didn't really understand why Grady called him pretty boy when that Grady's clearly a pretty boy.
He's the pretty boy, right?
He's the pretty boy with the nice hair, like frilly, beautiful hair. And
well, he's staying at home on the night of the party. I wonder if he protests too much. Like he seems like he's the cool guy, but he's not going to the party. He's the guy who says things like, "What does he say? Do you ever remember your dreams, Grady?" And he says, "Only the wet ones."
Yeah.
Guys who talk that way, and to my experience, are not the ones who are actually having the lives that they depict. So maybe Grady sits at home in his room with his cool rock posters and, gets under his leather comforter, just waits for a good friend to drop by.
Oh. Also, when Grady was screaming for his life, it felt like no one was really concerned. Parents are useless in the first 2 movies. And there's a point when, and it's funny, they're all very concerned about them before shit kicks off. When shit kicks off, they get very like, they can't hear screams from within 20 feet of a window.
You're right, Ronald. He's like in there screaming at the top of his lungs, like reverting to like childish kind of screams. Yes. And he's on the dad's on the other side, but like, what's going on in there?
Yeah, what? Come on, Grady. It's just.
That's Ferris Bueller's dad too.
So, question about a scene like that. So, in that scene, is the answer that he's actually sleeping?
I think that Freddy is out. I think that Freddy came. I don't think that Freddy actually entered the world. Yes. I think that what happens, but what Grady's seeing is because he's asleep. But that, yes, he is like up and Freddy is coming at him in the physical space of the room because Freddy's out at that point, right? Like,
yeah, I'm thinking about like why the parents would be like, "What's happening?"
I know they seem like they're out there for a long time, going, "What's happening?"
Yeah, it's like almost like a passive, like, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
Like it's not like an active, like, not to give more credit than is due to. Maybe it's just like a bad decision.
I think it is just bad, but it's fun to try to give.
Yeah,
more credit.
It is like because you can think about that, and like that would make sense actually. Like you hear your kid like maybe having a bad dream, but you don't go in. But in Grady's eyes, like it's like murders happening, like that's why we are watching it so loud and huge. But
we know about Grady's dreams, so his parents have learned not to come in.
Exactly. Like they know better.
Yeah. His mom has had to wipe down that leather comforter.
How do you feel about the distribution of the murders in this film? Like in the first 40 minutes, I'm almost seeing no carnage. I'm just seeing a bunch of
how many people die in this movie? The coach.
Yeah.
And then like we can't count the people. I mean, we can
the pool
count
party,
them, but it's hard to say.
When Freddy starts to do like the side gallop to get to it, he's just kind of like he's playing defense on them like they're playing basketball or something to kind of capture them. It's like a side gallop that he's doing, which is very annoying.
I liked the close-ups of his mouth when he would revert to the personality of Jesse. It was like, how on Ren and Stimpy when they cut to the close-up and it's like a painting and it's
like so detailed,
super gross. Those shots were some of the most disgusting shots in the movie because it's and those shots, it honestly looked like the wetness on him was blood. So to your point, Ronald, yes, every shot Freddy has a different
different.
look, a different like off-model design.
Yeah.
So it looks like the kill count has, so not including the pool partiers, it maybe 3.
Oh
See?
my God.
See?
Yeah, like if you include Carrie, at the end.
It doesn't make any sense. This is
And the parakeets don't count either, but
Yeah.
the first. Oh yes, they were. God, man, I felt so bad for them getting caught in that destruction. So for the first
We're not going to even talk about the toaster that got lost.
Yeah, the toaster. We saw murder happening constantly in the first. The second, it seems like there's upwards of like 40 minutes between some of the murders. Like it just feels like it's not really, the stakes are very low. And he's also taking it out on one person. That's also very weird. Like he's just like, I just don't fuck with this guy.
Well, he's like you. He's like, this guy sucks.
He sucks. He exaggerates.
I want to see if I can use him.
If you count the pool partiers, this is the highest kill count in any of the Nightmare films.
We're not going to count that because it certainly doesn't feel like the highest.
That's a confirmed 10 kills, including the
okay.
pool people and the guy he throws into the grill. And it also says
That guy died in the grill?
I mean, that's what it says, yeah.
Oh my God, that guy is so great.
He's labeled as would-be negotiator, slashed and thrown into grill.
That's right. The guy who says, like, we're here to help you. And he says, help yourself.
Yeah. So tell me this. So Freddy can materialize anywhere. He can manipulate his body. But when it comes to fucking barriers, when it comes to gates, he can't go through the gate. He has to kind of singe the gate. He can't really. What's that about? Why does he choose to not be violent when he's exiting? He's just like, all right, see you guys later. And he just
it's way too much logic.
singes the
too much thought went into that.
It's yeah, I don't understand. I'm just saying, like, why did he do that? He in the prison scene in the first film, he goes through the wall without creating any sort of And then the other time, the path of destruction is very different in the second, is all I'm saying.
I think you're right.
Strange movie.
I wanted to mention also when we were talking about the month, like John mentioned the budget and the gross. It is kind of crazy to think. I mean, basically, like inflation would, basically like 10 times whatever it was then now. But I mean, like it is kind of like crazy to think, like if you thought now, like if a horror movie came out now and was gross, budgeted for, I think it was, well, no, I guess it was, you said it was 3, right? 3 million.
Yeah.
So like, hold on. Do I got this math right? 3, it made how much again, you said?
It made
30.
I think it made 30. Yeah. 57 on 1.1 and then 30 on 3.
Yeah. And
it's just kind of crazy to think about, like, the movies that come out today that, that are deemed successes. And obviously the box office has changed a lot, but I mean, for being the second film, they got out within a year afterwards, making 10 times what your budget was that's huge. I mean, like, it may not have made as much as Nightmare did, the first one, but, making 10 times your budget, that's like a massive success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's enough to say, like, okay,
let's make
we got to get another one out. You know what I mean? Like we got to keep this train rolling, and obviously
and they did, Steve.
Yeah.
They did.
Transition.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The last thing I'm going to say, you got to give this cultural context too. It was harder to go to the movie theater. You would have to look at the newspaper and look up the times. And if you had an old newspaper, you just had the number. So you had to call and listen to the time that it was there, go to the theater. It just, you couldn't buy anything in advance. And if you go, this is Freddy, the most popular movie. You go there, all the way there, and they'd say, oh, tickets are sold out. You're like, shit, I'm going to go in a week to see this. You had to make an effort, is all I'm saying. It was very different to see a movie now. Yeah. I remember going into situations in the 90s where shit was just sold out because I couldn't call ahead and see if, so you had to make an effort. That's all I'm saying. $30 million. Sorry.
No, I was
Right.
just looking to see the gap. Like they took a year to make the second one, and you know, the
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
They spent a little extra time making part 3. So we're gonna find out next time if it was worth the extra year. I'll go ahead and give you this little preview that the third Nightmare on Elm Street movie cost a little bit more. It cost anywhere from 4.3 to 4.6 million, but it made. Wow. Do you happen to know, Steve?
No.
It made basically the same return, or the
10
same.
times.
Yeah, it's about 44.8 million.
Oh,
so
wow.
it's about 10 times the budget.
Gotcha.
Which again, if you say that sounds insane. Any movie making 10 times its budget is fantastic.
Yeah, and a horror film to
Yeah.
be the like, and that holds true today. We know that. You know, the Blumhouse model of saying, you know, we're going to cap this budget. That's why they succeed off of case studies like these. You know what I mean? And I mean, I'm sure that's a conversation that a lot of these production houses have, is that like horror is profitable because of movies that pave the way, like the Halloweens, like the Jasons, that they make these movies. And, you know, again, in, you know, 1984, 85, you know, $4 million, $5 million, whatever, you know, as we ramp up these sequels, you know, it's a lot of money, but like in the scope of like what's being made in Hollywood, it still pales in comparison. And that's why these horror films, even to this day, you know, they kind of are able to exercise that approach to making them, is that people are drawn to these movies for a very visceral reason, and you can make them for not a lot of money, and you can make a lot of money on them if they connect. And like, this is a series that for the better part of the run of the franchise continues to see that kind of return, you know, the 7 to 10 multiplier of the budget to the box office. But next time we come back to Nightmare, we'll talk about what Dream Warrior and Dream Master.
Is that the order? Yeah, it's Dream.
I think Warriors 3,
Master.
Masters 4, and what is it? Dream
Child.
Yeah, there we go. But yeah, spoiler alert, Nightmare 3 is probably the best one, so I can't wait to watch that one.
Yeah.
And,
but Nightmare 3 is also
pumped.
when they turn the corner into the version of Freddy, the hero. I mean, even though he's still despicable, he's still villainous.
Yeah.
But these two movies are the ones where he's the most like, he's evil, he's a monster, we think he's gross. After this, he starts to become a slightly cuddlier version, or a slightly funnier version, at least. But at that point, he's popping up as a pop cultural figure, not like Pee Wee Herman or something.
Yeah,
at that point,
that's exactly what it is, and it's across the next two that we'll get to. They really are the crossroads in this series, where you do have that, you know, moment where the zingers, the character of Freddy Krueger, and the idea of like the dream element and the approach to killing these teens off one by one, I think really kind of hit like a pinnacle, you know, where it's not too much of one and not enough of the other. You know, I think these two are both of them are actually pretty great. And, you know, you really do get to enjoy just the idea that we can balance out the approach that he takes to killing these people, and kind of developing the character to be able to use as a franchise icon. And it really kind of clicks in 3 and 4.
Well, like you see someone and you go, they really developed this guy so that I know that he loves tube socks. So I know that he's going to be stuffed into a tube sock, or he's going to be stuffed full of tube socks or something.
Yeah.
A big tube sock's going to come out and it's going to be red and green. Something's going to happen. But no, I think you're right. Like 3 is like when they hit at that formula. 4 is almost like when they perfect the formula.
Yeah.
And then it's like, then that's, I mean, yeah, we're spoiling our opinions, but
we'll get to it.
After that, it's a little different.
This will be the more interesting ones to probably talk about.
Right.
We've talked about the other ones so much on the
true.
podcast.
That's true. 3 and 4, that's true. We're going to have to work hard to point out sequences we haven't yet. But honestly, for Freddy's Revenge, this is the first time in a while that I've watched it. So I'm glad I had an excuse to watch it. And I do think some parts of it, I think that, like the first one, that mix of dream world and real world is a powerful idea. And there are scenes in that just can't help but have power to them when this Jesse, when he's not screaming and he's not emoting and he's just wandering around. Like that feeling that you have of, it's not the whole thing of what later becomes a gag in these movies of, oh, we know the person's dreaming and we see how it's like, it's more that we're witnessing someone notice that things just aren't quite right.
Yep.
In their world,
exactly.
And that still has power, I think.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Well, that'll wrap up this the start of the Nightmare franchise in our new Watch 'Em All series.
Yeah, I like that. Watch them all.
Watch 'Em All.
See, I like that we could say watch them all, but we can also call them watch 'em alls. Like these movies are watch 'em alls because they're the kind you watch them all. Yeah.
Yeah, I said before we were recording, like, you know, we're trying to get that into the pop culture. You know what I mean? We have Pajanimals. I have a 3-year-old, so I know them all. You know, Hatchimals, Pajanimals, whatever. Now there's Watch 'Em Alls.
Yeah, right.
We should probably copyright it or trademark it now before this episode comes out. We're gonna regret this.
We won't.
Yeah, not at all.
History
Movieshmovie.com.
indicates we won't.
Movieshmovie.com is the website. Again, I mentioned at the top of the episode, if you are a fan of the MCU, Marvel movies, comic books, or just our podcast, you can hit up our YouTube channel to not only see our podcast video episodes, but also the special Marvel Schmarvel series that we're doing to kind of follow along with the Disney Plus series. So if you can hit the YouTube up, you can subscribe, get notifications about when those videos and these come up on the channel. If you want to find the podcast and listen to it in your earbuds or in your Bluetooth speakers in your homes or wherever you choose, you can find the podcast on basically every podcast platform. But if you go to pod.link/movie-schmovie, it's a nice little page that we have that lets you take your pick wherever you prefer to listen to it. And wherever you are, if there's an option to review it or rate it or give some feedback on it, we would love that if you can do that, and let us know what you think of the podcast. You guys have anything else you want to mention before we sign off?
No.
Cool. Thank you guys for getting together. I had a lot of fun talking about Nightmare on Elm Street, and we'll be back next week with an episode about the current releases coming out next Friday, March 5th. And we'll see you guys then. As always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.
Bitch.
You've got the body, and I've got the brain. Wasn't that in a song? Like, didn't they put that in a?
It's the Pet Shop Boys. I've got the brains. You've got the brawn.